The evacuation sirens wailed across the settlement of New Hope on Verdant, the lush jungle moon orbiting Proxima Centauri B. Lieutenant Tahoe watched from his hidden position as the last civilian transports lifted off, disappearing into the hazy green atmosphere. All personnel to evacuation points. This is not a drill. The Krell advance has broken through our outer defenses, announced Colonel Han over the emergency channel. Taiho's fingers tightened around his custom Tsar 87 sniper rifle. 6 years of military service, 4 as a colony defense force sniper, and now they were simply abandoning Verdant to the aliens. The strange bipedal creatures had appeared 3 weeks ago, their crystal ships descending without warning. Lieutenant Kim, confirm your position for extraction, came the voice of his squad leader, G1. Taiho watched the Krell ships landing in the distance, their hulls gleaming like polished obsidian. He made his decision in that moment. Negative on extraction, he replied. Someone needs to stay and observe their operations. That's a negative, Lieutenant. Direct order to evacuate. Taiho switched off his comm unit. The last military transport would leave in 20 minutes. He wouldn't be on it. Rain began to fall as Taiho moved deeper into the jungle. The thick canopy above provided some shelter, but water still dripped onto his combat gear. He found a tall tree with good visibility of the settlement and climbed up, setting himself in a position where branches concealed his form. Through his scope, he watched the final human transport rise into the clouds. A strange emptiness filled his chest. For the first time in the colony's 15-year history, no humans would walk on Verdant's surface, except him. The Krell ships grew larger as they approached the abandoned settlement. Their crystal structures caught the sunlight in strange patterns, creating rainbow effects across their surfaces. Taiho counted 12 small fighter craft and 3 larger troop carriers. The invasion force wasn't as large as he'd expected. Perhaps the Krell didn't consider Verdant important enough for a major deployment. The first aliens emerged from their ships 6 hours later. Taiho studied them through his scope. The Krell stood about 7 feet tall, their bodies covered in a chitinous exoskeleton that resembled polished stone more than insect carapace. They moved with surprising grace for creatures of their size, their 4 arms working in perfect coordination as they set up equipment around the human buildings. Taiho took careful notes in his waterproof pad. The Krell appeared to be establishing a perimeter, placing sensor devices at regular intervals. Their weapons, long crystalline rifles that emitted green energy, remained at the ready, but they seemed relaxed, not expecting resistance. Night fell, and the jungle came alive with bioluminescent plants and insects. The natural glow provided just enough light for Taiho to see without using his night vision gear. The Krell had set up powerful lights around the settlement, turning night into day within their perimeter. A larger ship descended from the clouds around midnight. Unlike the others, this one glowed with a blue internal light. It landed in the center of what had been the colony's main plaza. A ramp extended, and a single Krell emerged, larger than the others, with red markings across its exoskeleton. The commander. Taiho zoomed in his scope, memorizing every detail. The Krell commander gestured, and a holographic projection appeared above the plaza. Taiho recognized the image. It was the retreating human transport ships. The gathered Krell made a sound, a clicking, chittering noise that Taiho realized with a shock was laughter. They were mocking humanity's retreat. The commander spoke, its voice carried across the empty settlement by some kind of amplification device. Though Taiho couldn't understand the words, the tone was clear: triumph, disdain, and confidence. Taiho marked the commander in his notes as primary target, then carefully backed down from his position. He needed to find shelter for the night and plan his next move. 2 days later, Taiho had established a temporary base in a cave behind a small waterfall 3 miles from the settlement. The noise of the falling water would mask any sounds he made, and the water itself confused Krell thermal scanners. He had managed to retrieve some supplies from a hidden emergency cache, including ration packs, water purifiers, and additional ammunition for his rifle. From his new observation post on a ridge overlooking the settlement, Tai-Ho watched the Krell operations with growing interest. They weren't simply occupying the human buildings, they were digging. Several large excavation machines had been unloaded from their ships, and they were boring deep into Verdant's crust at the north end of the settlement. What were they looking for? Verdant had few valuable minerals, which was why the moon had been chosen for agriculture rather than mining. The colony's primary purpose was growing food crops that thrived in the humid jungle environment, supporting other human settlements in the Proxima Centauri system. On the fifth day, Tai-Ho observed a change in the Krell routine. A group of what appeared to be scientists arrived, distinguished by their lighter-colored exoskeletons and the delicate instruments they carried. They gathered excitedly around something brought up from the excavation site, a glowing blue crystal unlike anything Tai-Ho had seen before. The Krell commander approached, taking the crystal and holding it up. Even from his distant position, Tai-Ho could see the reverence in the gesture. Whatever they had found, it was valuable to them. That night, Tai-Ho made his first dangerous move. Using the darkness as cover, he approached the perimeter of the settlement. The Krell had set up regular patrols, but they were predictable in their movements. He timed his approach carefully, slipping between sensor posts during a 30-second window when the patrols were at their furthest points. He reached an abandoned storage building that offered a view of the excavation site. Inside, he found a forgotten human datavat. By some miracle, it still had power. Tai-Ho downloaded the colony's geological survey data, then retreated back to the jungle before dawn. The survey confirmed his suspicions. There was nothing of known value in that area. Whatever the Krell were mining, it was something humans hadn't discovered or recognized. Over the next 2 weeks, Tai-Ho observed the Krell operation expand. More ships arrived. The excavation grew deeper and wider. The blue crystals were carefully extracted and loaded onto special containers. Tai-Ho began to understand. This wasn't a military conquest. It was a mining operation. The Krell had attacked the colony not to take territory, but to secure these mysterious crystals. And in that knowledge, he found his purpose. If these crystals were so important to the Krell, then disrupting their extraction would hit them harder than any direct attack. Tai-Ho began planning, watching the Krell commander's movements, looking for patterns and weaknesses. One man against an alien mining operation. Impossible odds. But as the rain fell on the 30th day of his solitary resistance, Lieutenant Kim Tai-Ho smiled for the first time since the evacuation. He had found his mission on the jungle moon of Verdant. 2 months passed. Tai-Ho had established a network of small shelters throughout the dense jungle, never staying in one location for more than 2 nights. The Krell seemed to believe they had successfully cleared the moon of human presence, growing increasingly casual in their patrols. In his primary hideout, a small cave hidden behind a waterfall, Tai-Ho reviewed his notes. The aliens were mining something from Verdant's core, some mineral they called Kesh in their strange clicking language. He had learned to understand bits of their communication by observing them. Day 58, he recorded in his journal. Krell Commander Uktal scheduled to inspect the southern mining operation tomorrow at dawn. Tai-Ho checked his remaining ammunition, 17 specialized rounds designed to penetrate Krell exoskeletons. He had scavenged parts from abandoned outposts to modify his rifle for silent operation. The jungle provided everything else he needed: camouflage from the bioluminescent moss, food from the abundant fruit trees, and the thick canopy that confused Krell sensors. Tomorrow would mark his first strike. Tai-Ho closed his journal and put it in a waterproof container. The sound of the waterfall masked any noise he made, but he remained quiet out of habit. His beard had grown thick and wild, and his once neat military uniform was now stained with mud and plant juices that helped him blend into the jungle. He picked up a piece of fruit, the locals had called them skyberries, and bit into its sweet flesh. The juice ran down his chin as he stared at the map he had drawn of Krell operations. 5 mining sites now dotted Verdant's surface, all extracting the blue crystal material the aliens valued so highly. The southern site was the smallest, but perhaps the most important. Tai-Ho had observed Senior Krell visiting it more frequently than the others. His reconnaissance suggested they had found particularly pure samples of Kesh there. As night fell, Tai-Ho prepared his equipment. He checked his rifle one final time, making sure the sound suppressor he had crafted from colony air filters and rubber seals would hold. The modification reduced the weapon's effective range, but would prevent the distinctive crack from giving away his position. He coated his face and hands with mud mixed with the juice of bioluminescent plants. In the darkness, the faint glow would match the natural background radiation of the jungle, helping him avoid Krell thermal scanners. Around midnight, Tai-Ho left his cave and began the 6-mile trek to his chosen position. The jungle was alive with sounds: the calls of night birds, the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth, the occasional deep bellow of a grazer in the distance. These sounds had become his constant companions, replacing the voices of his fellow soldiers and colonists. He moved carefully through the dense vegetation, stopping frequently to listen for Krell patrols. Their heavy footsteps were easy to distinguish from natural jungle sounds. Twice he had to hide as small squads passed nearby, but they were casual in their movements, weapons lowered, clearly not expecting any threat. By 3 in the morning, Tai-Ho reached the ridge overlooking the southern mining site. He crawled into position beneath a fallen tree that provided both cover and a stable platform for his rifle. From here, he had a clear view of the landing pad where Commander Yuktal's shuttle would arrive. Tai-Ho settled in to wait, controlling his breathing as he had been trained. The stars above Verdant shone through gaps in the canopy, reminding him of nights spent on watch during his military service. Back then, he had been protecting human settlements from natural predators. Now he was the predator. Dawn approached slowly. The sky lightened from black to deep blue, then to purple. Mist rose from the jungle floor, creating a ghostly landscape. Tai-Ho remained motionless, only his eyes moving as he scanned the area through his scope. The Krell began their day shift, emerging from prefabricated structures they had erected near the mining site. Tai-Ho counted 17 workers and 4 security personnel. Their movements were practiced and efficient as they activated machinery and prepared for the day's extraction. At precisely 600 local time, a crystal shuttle descended from the clouds. Unlike the military vessels Tai-Ho had observed during the invasion, this one was smaller and more elegant, clearly designed for a high-ranking official. The shuttle landed on the designated pad. Security personnel formed a line on either side of the ramp. The door slid open, and Commander Uktal emerged. Tai-Ho studied the commander through his scope. Uktal was larger than the average Krell, with distinctive red markings across its exoskeleton. It wore what appeared to be ceremonial armor that glinted in the early morning light. 2 scientist-cased Krell approached Uktal, their head plates lowered in what Tai-Ho had learned was a sign of respect. They presented a container, which the commander opened. Inside, a large blue crystal glowed with internal light. Tai-Ho took a deep breath, exhaled halfway, and held it. He adjusted slightly for the light morning breeze. The distance was approximately 800 meters, well within his capabilities, even with the suppressor reducing the bullet's velocity. His finger caressed the trigger. In his mind, he saw the faces of the colonists who had been killed in the initial Krell attack. He remembered the children who had asked him to protect them as they boarded the evacuation ships. He thought of humanity's retreat from Verdant. Tai-Ho squeezed the trigger. The rifle made a dull thump, far quieter than its normal report. Through his scope, Tai-Ho watched the specialized round strike Commander Uktal at the junction between head and thorax, one of the few vulnerable points in Krell anatomy that his observations had revealed. The commander staggered, blue fluid spraying from the wound. The crystal container fell from its hands, shattering on the landing pad. The blue crystal inside broke into pieces, each fragment continuing to glow. For a moment, everyone at the site froze in shock. Then chaos erupted. The security personnel raised their weapons, firing randomly into the jungle. Scientists scattered, seeking cover. The workers stood confused, awaiting orders that would not come. Taiho was already moving, sliding backward from his position and into the dense undergrowth. He had rehearsed this withdrawal dozens of times in his mind. Every step was planned, every movement precise. Behind him, alarm sirens began to wail at the mining site. Above, a security drone launched, its sensors scanning the jungle. But Taiho had already disappeared into a ravine where the thick foliage blocked all signals. He moved quickly but carefully, using streams where possible to avoid leaving tracks. The bioluminescent mud on his skin matched the natural glow of the jungle floor, confusing any sensors that might pick up his heat signature. By mid-morning, Taiho had reached one of his secondary shelters, a hollow beneath the roots of a massive tree. He crawled inside and allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. The first strike had been successful. Commander Uktal was dead. The Krell would be disoriented, confused by an attack they had thought impossible. Their mining operation would be disrupted, at least temporarily. More importantly, they would now know that humanity had not completely abandoned Verdant. That a resistance, however small, remained. That their mockery had been premature. As Taiho rested in his hiding place, he could hear the distant sound of Krell security ships crisscrossing the jungle. Their search pattern was inefficient, covering areas too far from the mining site. They had no experience tracking the human through this terrain. Taiho opened his journal and made a new entry. Day 59. First strike successful. Commander Uktal eliminated. Krell response disorganized. Will observe for 3 days before selecting next target. He had 16 specialized rounds remaining. 16 more opportunities to strike at the alien invaders. 16 chances to show them that human resistance continued on the jungle moon of Verdant. Outside, the search continued, but Taiho felt no fear. The jungle was his ally now, and he had become its ghost. The morning mist hung thick between the massive jungle trees as Taiho settled into position. 2 kilometers away, the Krell mining facility buzzed with activity. Through his scope, he identified Commander Uktal by the distinctive red markings on its carapace. Taiho controlled his breathing, just as he had done hundreds of times in training. The distance, wind speed, and atmospheric density had all been calculated. He squeezed the trigger. The commander collapsed instantly. Before the other Krell could react, Taiho had already disappeared into the jungle. The effect was immediate. Without their commander, the Krell fell into disarray. Their rigid hierarchy couldn't adapt to the unexpected loss. Over the next weeks, Taiho continued his campaign. A supply officer here, a security chief there. Never attacking ordinary soldiers, always targeting command. The Krell began to fear the jungle. Rumors spread among them of a human ghost who could strike from nowhere. 20 days after the first strike, Taiho crouched in the hollow of a massive tree trunk. His beard had grown longer, and his face was painted with mud and plant dyes. He looked more like a creature of the jungle than a human soldier. He opened his tattered journal and marked another successful mission. Yesterday, he had eliminated the Krell's chief security officer at the main mining site. That made 5 high-ranking targets in 3 weeks. The Krell were changing their patterns now. They moved in larger groups. They cut down sections of the jungle around their facilities to create clear fields of fire. They deployed more drones and sensors. None of it mattered. Taiho had become one with Verdant's ecosystem, and the jungle protected him. He gathered his few possessions and prepared to move to a new location. He never stayed in one place for more than a single night now. The Krell were learning, adapting, but too slowly. As the sun rose higher, burning away the morning mist, Taiho made his way through the dense undergrowth toward his next observation post. He moved silently, his footsteps barely disturbing the leaf litter. Months in the jungle had taught him to walk like its native creatures. From a ridge overlooking the eastern mining facility, Taiho watched through his binoculars as a new Krell transport ship landed. a replacement for the security chief. No doubt. The aliens were predictable that way. Remove one officer, and they simply sent another to take the same position with the same vulnerabilities. A flash of movement caught his eye. A Krell patrol, much closer than usual. They had changed their route. Tai-Ho remained perfectly still as 4 heavily armed Krell passed just 30 meters from his position. They carried new weapons, shorter, bulkier designs that looked like they might be for close combat rather than the usual long-range crystal rifles. They were adapting faster than he had anticipated. Once the patrol passed, Tai-Ho carefully made his way down the other side of the ridge. He needed to get closer to the landing pad to identify the new arrival. The jungle thinned as he approached the cleared zone around the facility. The Krell had burned back nearly 200 meters of vegetation, leaving only scorched earth. It made approaching much more difficult, but not impossible. Tai-Ho found a small stream that ran under the perimeter sensors. The water would mask his heat signature, and the tunnel created by the stream was just large enough for him to crawl through. He entered the cold water and began to work his way slowly toward the facility. 15 minutes of careful movement brought him to a position behind a pile of excavated rock. From here, he had a clear view of the landing pad and the new arrival. The replacement officer was larger than most Krell, with blue markings instead of the usual green. It carried what looked like a ceremonial staff and was flanked by 6 guards in enhanced armor. Tai-Ho took out his small notebook and made quick notes. This was no ordinary replacement. The blue markings indicated a higher caste, possibly military leadership rather than mining operations. The Krell were escalating their response. As he watched, the blue-marked Krell addressed the gathered workers. Though Tai-Ho couldn't understand most of the clicking language, he had learned enough over the months to catch some words. Human, threat, hunt, kill. The new commander was there specifically to deal with him. Tai-Ho felt a mix of pride and concern. They were taking him seriously now, which meant they would commit more resources to finding him. He needed to strike soon, before the new security measures were fully implemented. But this target would be more heavily guarded than the others. He would need a different approach. Tai-Ho retreated carefully, using the stream to mask his exit just as it had hidden his approach. Back in the relative safety of the dense jungle, he began to formulate a plan. That night, he prepared carefully. He used the last of his military-grade explosives, salvaged from an abandoned outpost, to create a small but effective diversion. He checked his rifle, cleaned it meticulously, and loaded one of his precious few remaining specialized rounds. Before dawn, he was in position on a hill overlooking the eastern facility. The explosive device was in place near the facility's power generators, set to detonate remotely. As the first light of dawn broke over the jungle, the blue-marked commander emerged from its quarters, surrounded by the same 6 guards. They moved toward the mining pit, clearly beginning a morning inspection. Tai-Ho waited. Patience had become his greatest weapon. When the commander reached the center of the open area, Tai-Ho activated the explosive. The blast was small but precise, damaging the power generators and plunging the facility into momentary darkness as emergency systems kicked in. As expected, 4 of the 6 guards rushed toward the source of the explosion. The commander barked orders, keeping 2 guards at its side. Still, Tai-Ho waited. The shot was difficult, nearly 3 kilometers, with swirling mist affecting visibility. He controlled his breathing, feeling his heartbeat slow. He squeezed the trigger. The specialized round found its mark. The blue-marked commander fell. Its exoskeleton cracked at the junction between head and thorax. The 2 remaining guards looked around frantically, unable to determine where the shot had come from. Tai-Ho was already moving, sliding down the opposite side of the hill and into the thick jungle cover. Behind him, alarms blared across the facility. 3 days later, hidden in a cave network far from any Krell facility, Tai-Ho monitored their communications using a modified receiver he had assembled from scavenged parts. The chatter was constant and panicked. The death of the blue-marked commander had sent shockwaves through the Krell hierarchy. They spoke of the jungle ghost with increasing fear. Some Krell were refusing to take outside assignments. Work efficiency had dropped by nearly 60%. One transmission particularly caught Taiho's attention. A high-ranking Krell was demanding reinforcements, claiming that the human resistance on Verdant is more significant than reported. Taiho smiled at that. Let them think he was part of a larger force. Let them waste resources searching for a resistance that consisted of one man with a rifle. As weeks passed, Taiho continued his campaign. Each strike was carefully planned, each target selected for maximum psychological impact. A communications officer here, a logistics chief there. With each successful mission, the legend of the jungle ghost grew. The Krell began to change their operations. They conducted mining only during daylight hours. They established new protocols requiring officers to remain inside hardened structures. They doubled and then tripled their security patrols. It didn't matter. Taiho adapted faster than they could. When they hardened their buildings, he targeted transport ships during landing. When they increased patrols, he used their own patrol patterns to move undetected between them. 6 months after the evacuation of Verdant, the lone human sniper had become the Krell's greatest fear. Workers requested transfers off-world. Security personnel jumped at shadows. Officers refused to leave their quarters without heavy escorts. The jungle had become humanity's ally in this strange, one-sided war. And Lieutenant Kim Taiho, the ghost of Verdant, had no intention of stopping until the last Krell ship fled the moon they had once mockingly claimed as their own. Human detected in Sector 7. All units converge. Taiho sprinted through the undergrowth as Krell search drones buzzed overhead. They had brought in specialized hunter units with enhanced sensory capabilities. A drone spotted him, and moments later, energy bolts sizzled past his head. One grazed his leg, sending him tumbling down a ravine. Pain lanced through his body as he landed hard against a fallen tree. Dragging himself under the massive roots, Taiho applied a medical patch to his wounded leg. The hunters would be on him soon. That night, feverish from his injury, he managed to hijack a Krell communication node. For the first time in months, he made contact with humanity. This is Lieutenant Kim Taiho, Defense Force ID 87,392. I'm alive on Verdant and have been conducting operations against Krell forces. They're mining a substance called Kesh. Request immediate data upload. Days later, as he recovered, a response came. Lieutenant Kim, this is Admiral Song. Your intelligence has been invaluable. Continue operations. Support incoming. The pain in Taiho's leg throbbed with each beat of his heart. The medical patch had stopped the bleeding, but the wound was deep. The Krell energy weapon had burned through his pants and seared the flesh beneath. He needed real medical attention, but that was impossible now. From his hiding place beneath the massive tree roots, Taiho listened to the sounds of the Krell hunters moving through the jungle. They were closer than any search party had ever come before. Their new equipment was working. Find human. Find ghost. The clicks and chirps of Krell speech carried through the evening air. Taiho had learned enough of their language to understand simple commands. He checked his water supply. Less than half a bottle remained. His ration packs were gone. He had been moving toward one of his supply caches when the drone spotted him, but that was now behind enemy lines. Night fell fully, bringing a heavy rain that drummed against the leaves above. The water seeped through the root system, soaking Taiho's clothes, but he welcomed it. The rain would mask his heat signature and wash away any blood trail he might have left. When the search sounds faded, Taiho dragged himself deeper into the root system. The ancient tree had grown around a small cave entrance, creating a natural shelter that was nearly impossible to spot. He had discovered it weeks ago, but had saved it for an emergency. This qualified. Inside, he took stock of his situation. His rifle was intact, but he had only 3 specialized rounds left. His sidearm had 2 full magazines. Food was gone. Water could be collected from the rain. His comm unit was damaged from the fall. The fever came as midnight approached. Tai-Ho shivered despite the warm jungle air. The wound was infected. Without antibiotics, he wouldn't last a week. In his delirium, Tai-Ho remembered the abandoned research station 6 miles to the north. The colonists had been studying Verdant's unique plant life there. If any place would have medical supplies, it would be there. But reaching it meant crossing open ground watched by Krell drones. He had no choice. When dawn broke, Tai-Ho fashioned a crude crutch from a fallen branch and began the painful journey north. Each step sent fire up his leg, but he forced himself forward. The rain continued, providing cover from aerial observation. By midday, he had covered only 2 miles. The fever was worse, and his vision occasionally blurred. He rested in the hollow of a fallen log as a Krell patrol passed nearby. Their new armor gleamed despite the rain, and they carried scanning devices that swept back and forth across the jungle floor. Tai-Ho remained perfectly still until they passed. Once they were gone, he continued his slow progress north. The jungle seemed to help him, providing cover and paths that were hidden from above. Or perhaps that was just the fever making him imagine the trees were bending to shield him. Night fell again before he reached the research station. He could see its outline against the darkening sky, a low, rectangular building nestled against a hillside. Lights glowed inside. The Krell had occupied it. Tai-Ho collapsed behind a boulder, his strength failing. He was so close, but the station might as well have been on another planet. He couldn't fight his way past Krell guards in his condition. As he lay there, considering his options, he noticed a small drainage pipe leading from the station into the hillside. It was barely wide enough for a human to crawl through, and it would be a tight fit, but it might be his only chance. Gathering his remaining strength, Tai-Ho dragged himself to the pipe entrance. The metal was cold against his fevered skin as he squeezed inside. The pipe sloped gently upward, carrying runoff water from the station's cooling systems. The noise of the water would mask any sounds he made. After 20 minutes of painful crawling, Tai-Ho reached a grate that looked into the station's maintenance room. 2 Krell technicians were working on equipment, their backs to him. On a shelf near the wall, he spotted what he needed: a human medical kit with the Red Cross symbol still visible. Tai-Ho waited, fighting to stay conscious. After what seemed like hours, the technicians left the room. He pushed against the grate, which gave way more easily than expected. Perhaps the Krell had never considered that someone might enter this way. He pulled himself into the room and grabbed the medical kit. As he turned to leave, he noticed something else: a Krell communication node, identical to the ones used at their command centers. This was an unexpected prize. Taking the node would be risky. It was surely monitored, and using it would alert the Krell to his position. But the chance to communicate with the human fleet was worth the risk. Tai-Ho grabbed the node and retreated back into the pipe, replacing the grate behind him. The journey back down was even more painful than the climb up had been, but the medical kit gave him hope. Back in the safety of the jungle, Tai-Ho found a small cave and treated his wound. The human antibiotics fought against the infection, and the pain medication allowed him to think clearly for the first time in days. The communication node was more complex than he had anticipated, but his training included basic alien tech interfaces. After hours of careful work, he managed to bypass the Krell security protocols and access the human emergency frequency. This is Lieutenant Kim Tai-Ho, Defense Force ID 87,392. I'm alive on Verdant and have been conducting operations against Krell forces. They're mining a substance called Kesh. Request immediate data upload. He attached his journal entries, detailing everything he had learned about Krell operations, their mining of the blue crystals, and the weaknesses he had identified in their command structure. The transmission was brief, less than 5 seconds, but the Krell would detect it. Tai-Ho abandoned the cave immediately, moving deeper into the jungle despite his injury. He had revealed his position, but the risk was necessary. Humanity needed to know what was happening on Verdant. For 3 days, Taiho moved constantly, staying ahead of the intensified Krell search patrols. The antibiotics were working, and his fever broke on the 2nd day. His legs still hurt, but he could put weight on it now. On the 4th day, as he crouched beside a small stream to refill his water bottle, a familiar frequency came to life on the salvaged comm unit he had repaired. "Lieutenant Kim, this is Admiral Song. Your intelligence has been invaluable. Continue operations. Support incoming." Taiho stared at the comm unit in disbelief. For the first time in over 7 months, he was not alone. The human fleet had received his message and was responding. Support incoming could mean many things, perhaps just supply drops, maybe special forces. At the very least, it meant humanity had not forgotten Verdant. With renewed determination, Taiho studied the tactical data Admiral Song had included with the transmission. The fleet had analyzed his intelligence and identified key vulnerabilities in the Krell operation. They needed him to continue his campaign, focusing on specific targets that would maximize disruption before the fleet arrived. That night, Taiho cleaned his rifle and counted his remaining ammunition. 3 specialized rounds, 3 more chances to strike at the heart of the Krell operation. Admiral Song's data included something else: the true nature of the blue crystals the Krell called Kesh. They were not just valuable minerals. They were power sources for Krell faster than light drives, far more efficient than anything humans had developed. Verdant was one of the few places in the sector where these crystals formed naturally. No wonder the Krell had attacked. No wonder they feared his destruction of their mining operation. As dawn broke over the jungle moon, Taiho moved toward his next target, the primary processing facility, where the raw crystals were refined for transport. According to Admiral Song's intelligence, destroying this facility would set back the Krell operation by months. The lone sniper, once fighting only to survive and resist, now had a new purpose. He was the advanced scout for humanity's return to Verdant. And this time, the Krell would be the ones retreating. The Krell Supreme Commander had arrived. Through his scope, Taiho observed the massive alien disembarking from its crystalline shuttle, surrounded by elite guards. Intelligence from Admiral Song confirmed this was their highest military leader, come to address the mysterious attacks that had plagued their mining operation. Taiho had positioned himself on a cliff overlooking the main Krell compound. The shot would be his most difficult yet. Over 3 kilometers, through swirling atmospheric conditions. As the Krell gathered for their assembly, Taiho noticed something in the sky. Small flashes of light. The human fleet had arrived earlier than expected. He had one chance. The Supreme Commander stepped forward to address the gathered Krell. Taiho exhaled slowly and fired. Chaos erupted below as the Supreme Commander fell. Simultaneously, human dropships punched through the atmosphere, landing troops directly into the disorganized Krell forces. 3 days later, Taiho stood at the command center of New Hope Settlement as Colonel Han approached him. "Lieutenant, you disobeyed a direct order," said Han sternly. "Yes, sir," Taiho replied. "And in doing so, you may have saved this entire sector," Han continued, his expression softening. "The mineral they were mining would have fueled their war machine for decades. Your actions gave us the opportunity to strike when they were vulnerable." Taiho looked out the window where human ships were landing, bringing colonists back to their homes. "I just did what needed to be done, sir." In the distance, the jungle of Verdant stretched out, no longer a place of hiding, but a symbol of humanity's resilience. Dawn broke over Verdant with streaks of purple and gold. Taiho had been in position since midnight, his body motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. The cliff edge offered perfect visibility of the main Krell compound below, where activity had increased tenfold in the past day. His last specialized round was loaded. His rifle was clean and ready. His body, despite months of hardship, felt strong and steady. This would be his final shot on Verdant, one way or another. Admiral Song's last transmission had been clear. Supreme Commander Tok'ra arriving to inspect mining operation. Elimination would disrupt entire Krull chain of command. Fleet approaching, ETA 48 hours. But something had changed. The fleet was early. Taiho could see the tiny flashes in the upper atmosphere, ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Below, the Krell moved with purpose, preparing for their leader's address. They had constructed a raised platform in the center of what had once been the human colony's main plaza. Guards with heavy weapons formed a perimeter around the area, but they were focused outward, not upward. They never learned. The crystalline shuttle descended from the clouds, its surface reflecting the morning sunlight in rainbow patterns. It landed with precision on a designated pad near the platform. The door opened, and 6 elite guards emerged first, their armor more elaborate than any Taiho had seen before. Then came the Supreme Commander. Tok'ra stood nearly 9 feet tall, towering over the other Krell. Its exoskeleton was deep blue with gold markings that formed complex patterns across its surface. Unlike the other Krell, which had 4 arms, Tok'ra had 6, each ending in delicate manipulators that suggested both strength and precision. Taiho adjusted his scope, calculating for distance, wind, and atmospheric density. The shot would be at the extreme edge of his rifle's effective range, even without the suppressor he had discarded for this final mission. The morning thermals rising from the jungle created rippling distortions in his sight picture. There would be only one chance. Below, Tok'ra moved to the platform and began to address the gathered Krell. The amplification system carried fragments of its speech across the distance. Human resistance, failure unacceptable, complete extraction before. The flashes in the sky grew more numerous. The human fleet was beginning its assault. Soon, drop ships would enter the atmosphere. Taiho needed to act now, to create maximum chaos before the main attack. He took a deep breath, held it halfway, and centered his crosshairs on the small gap between Tok'ra's headplates, the one vulnerable spot his intelligence had identified. His finger took up the first pressure on the trigger. The universe narrowed to his sight picture, the crosshairs, and the target. Nothing else existed. Taiho squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound echoing across the valley. Through his scope, Taiho watched as the specialized round found its mark. Tok'ra staggered, blue fluid spraying from the wound. The Supreme Commander collapsed on the platform. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then chaos erupted. The Krell guards fired wildly into the surrounding jungle. Officers shouted contradictory orders. Workers fled in all directions. No one knew what to do without their Supreme Commander. Above, the first human dropships broke through the clouds, their engines roaring as they descended toward the compound. Perfect timing. Taiho shouldered his rifle and moved quickly from his position. His part in this battle was done. The human forces would handle the rest. He made his way down a hidden trail, moving quickly but carefully. Behind him, the sounds of battle grew as human forces engaged the disorganized Krell. Energy weapons discharged, and explosions shook the ground. The liberation of Verdant had begun. 2 days later, Taiho emerged from the jungle at the edge of New Hope settlement. Human soldiers stopped and stared as he approached. He was barely recognizable as human himself. His beard wild, his clothes tattered, his skin darkened and stained by months in the jungle. Lieutenant Kim Taiho, he identified himself to the checkpoint guards. Colonial Defense Force. Word of his presence spread quickly. He was escorted to the newly established command center, the same building that had served as the colony's administration hub before the evacuation. Inside, medical staff cleaned his wounds and gave him fresh clothes. They marveled at his condition, at the fact that he had survived alone for so long. "The Supreme Commander wants to see you," a young officer told him after he had showered and changed. Taiho was led to the main operations room. Colonel Han stood at a holographic display, directing cleanup operations. The colonel looked up as Tai-Ho entered, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant," Han said, his voice formal. "You disobeyed a direct order." Tai-Ho came to attention. "Yes, sir." The room fell silent. Other officers watched the exchange, their faces showing a mix of awe and respect for the man who had become known as the Ghost of Verdant. Han's stern expression held for a moment longer, then softened. "And in doing so, you may have saved this entire sector." He gestured to the holographic display, which showed the captured Krell mining operations. The mineral they were mining would have fueled their war machine for decades. "Your actions gave us the opportunity to strike when they were vulnerable." "I was just doing my job, sir," Tai-Ho replied. "Admiral Song sends his personal thanks," Han continued. "Your intelligence on the Kesh crystals and Krell operations was invaluable. The fleet was able to coordinate its attack perfectly thanks to your work." Through the command center's windows, Tai-Ho could see transport ships landing in the plaza. Civilians, the original colonists, were returning home. Children ran from the ships, laughing and pointing at the jungle as if greeting an old friend. "What happens now?" Tai-Ho asked. "Now we rebuild," Han replied. "The Krell have retreated from this sector entirely. The death of their supreme commander has thrown their whole military into chaos. We'll have time to strengthen our defenses before they regroup." Tai-Ho nodded. "And the jungle?" Han looked surprised by the question. "What about it?" "It saved me, protected me." Tai-Ho realized how strange that sounded. "I mean, I learned to use it for cover, and—" "I understand," Han said, though Tai-Ho wasn't sure he really did. "The environmental teams are already working on restoration plans. We'll be more careful this time about preserving the natural ecosystem." Tai-Ho looked out the window again, at the vast expanse of green that stretched to the horizon. For 8 months, that jungle had been his only ally, his home, his fortress. He had become part of it, and it part of him. "I'd like to help with that, sir," he said. "After some leave, of course." Han smiled. "I think that can be arranged, Lieutenant." As the sun set on Verdant that evening, Tai-Ho stood alone at the edge of the settlement, facing the jungle. In the distance, birds called to each other with songs he had learned to recognize during his time alone. The familiar sounds brought a sense of peace he hadn't felt in months. Tomorrow would bring debriefings, medical examinations, and the beginning of his reintegration into human society. But tonight, he stood between two worlds, the human colony behind him and the jungle before him, grateful to have saved them both. The jungle of Verdant was no longer a place of hiding, but a symbol of humanity's resilience. And Lieutenant Kim Tai-Ho, once the lone ghost who haunted its depths, would ensure it remained that way. The end.